Greetings to my fellow peace blunderers, and today I'm showing you an endgame that is going to blow your mind. And if you have seen it before, chances are some of you may have seen it. That's alright, don't go anywhere. I've got some very interesting insights to show you later on, developing on the ideas of this endgame. So, 101 years ago, back in 1921, an absolute legend, an absolute Chad, Richard Reti, published this magnificent endgame study in Kagens Neueste Schachnachrichten, a popular chess magazine in the German-speaking parts of the world at the time. It is essentially a puzzle, but what makes it stand out from myriads of other puzzles is its timelessness. That's why we still speak about it 101 years on. The ideas presented in this one are so deep and so easy to extrapolate to many other similar positions. It's just insane. That's why this endgame is so interesting and so useful. So, what is the puzzle? It's white to move, and at first glance, it seems like white is completely dead and buried. The pawns are going these ways, right, towards promotion, and if you try to catch the black pawn, well, obviously you cannot do that. If you go king h7, h4, king h6, h3, king h5, you get the gist. The black king will never be able to catch that pawn in time. It's just too far away. At the same time, white could say, I'm not stopping that pawn anyway. I don't really care. I'm going to queen my pawn instead, and I'm going to be much faster because my pawn is closer. What's the big deal? You play c7, but of course this plan is going to fail to king b7, which stops the pawn very easily, and we will never be able to get a queen from there. And this is what makes our pawn so vastly different from the h-pawn of our opponent. Our pawn is easily catchable, but the h-pawn is not. Or is it? Maybe it is indeed catchable. Maybe something could actually be done. Otherwise, why would this puzzle exist? Why would this endgame be so famous if it wasn't for the fact that white can miraculously draw this position? Now, how on earth and why is this position a draw with correct play? Of course. Now, to answer this question correctly, we first need to understand the nature of the magnificent piece that is the king. You see, the king is a very unique piece. The queen is only other piece that you have on the board that can do similar things in the sense that they can both move in any direction they want at will. However, the queen does not suffer from the imposed restrictions that you've got on the king. The king is, of course, can only move one square at a time. That means that you've always got to be extremely efficient with your king moves, especially in the endgame. The way you navigate your king around the board can a lot of the time decide whether the game is going to be a win, a draw, or a loss. So let me show you what I mean by saying that. Before I show you the solution to the puzzle, let's go over to another board that I've set up. It's kings only, and the black king doesn't really matter. I just need to have it to make the position work. Don't pay attention to the black king whatsoever. Now, remembering what we have learned at school, well, supposing you learned anything at school, I certainly didn't. But then again, even from a visual standpoint, right, we know that legs of a right triangle are always going to be shorter than its hypotenuse, right? It's just the law of geometry, the basic law of geometry. And visually, we can clearly see that the hypotenuse that I'm showing you right there, is clearly the longest line of the three. Now, why the basic course of geometry? All of a sudden, why even bring this up? Well, that is because the chess rules, the chess universe completely spits on that idea. And purely from chess perspective, the hypotenuse that is indeed the longest is of the same length as, let's say, the h1, h8 leg of that triangle. When we measure it in chess moves purely, how long does it take the king to get from h8 to a1? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, 7 moves. And how long does it take the king to get from h8 to h1? You probably guessed it, but let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, the same amount of moves. Now, when you think about it, it's actually mind-blowing because visually, if you don't think about it too much, it seems like a1 is so much farther away from our king than h1. And just to develop on that idea, look at the black king. I know that I've told you to ignore it, but now let's look at the black king. You would think that looking at these two kings, surely black king should be quicker to a1, but in reality, it's not. It's the same distance. It's the same number of moves. Now, having learned all of that, let's come back to the puzzle finally, and let me tell you why this is important. You see, based on what we have just learned, what we now understand is that if our king wants to go to, let's say, h2, right, it will need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves. And there is another way that our king can still reach h2 still in the same amount of moves, which is 6, if our king goes this way, diagonally, in a more efficient manner. g7, f6, e5, f4, g3, h2. Also 6 moves. Now you may say, well, so what, right? The king, okay, it can go to h2 in 2 different ways at the same efficiency. Oh, scary. It's still not fast enough to catch the pawn, right? g7, h4, f6, h3, e5, h2, and the pawn is queening, so what's the point? And the point is very simple. By going just in a straight line like this, trying to catch up to a pawn, of course, we will never catch it, but at the same time, we are purely committing our king to trying to catch that pawn, which is an impossible task. If instead you choose to go diagonally with king g7, suddenly your king is now more flexible. Suddenly, your king is more centralized, it's closer to the center of the board, and if it needs to, it can commit to either plan, either trying to catch a pawn or trying to promote a pawn of your own. Okay, so let's continue. h4, you ain't never catching that pawn, mate. King f6, okay. h3, sayonara, 2 moves away from queening. What are you going to do about it? Now, because our king is not on h6, hopelessly trying to catch up to this pawn, which it will never do, our king, instead of h6, is on f6. And being on f6 is absolutely crucial because from f6 we can travel to e6. And you say, okay, so what? h2, 1 move away from queening. And we're like, okay, c7. We are now also 1 move away from queening. And now as black, you go, okay, king b7, attacking the pawn. And now king d7, defending the pawn. Easy. If black decides to queen, of course, we're going to queen as well, with check, mind you. And this is going to be a draw. King and queen versus king and queen is not going to lead to anything decisive, unless you blunder your queen, but I'd like to hope that you're not going to. So now, you may go, okay, mate, okay. What if we go a couple of moves back? So you, in the end, promoted your pawn. Well, how about I stop you from that, okay? Your king is farther away, much farther away from your pawn than mine. I'll just play king b6, and I'm going to capture that pawn, and your threat is gone, and mine is still alive. Well, after king f6, is it? King takes on c6, and King g5. The pawn is gone. The black pawn is absolutely neutralized. h4, I just take. I am now fast enough. I am now fast enough because you've wasted 2 moves with your king, whereas I made 4 very efficient moves and eventually caught up. But no. Let's go back. Okay. So now I go h4. All right. Now you ain't catching up to me, mate. Now my king is about to eat your pawn and my pawn is running away from you. Okay. King e5. Let's see what you're going to do about that. Again, moving diagonally, keeping our options open, being as flexible as possible. No committing moves in a straight line, centralizing the king, keeping the king as relevant as possible to both sides of the board where the action is taking place. And now you go h3. Well, it's just true that after h3 I can no longer catch up, but king d6, go in to protect my pawn. And now I'm protecting my pawn. h2, 1 move away from queening, so am I. d7. King b7, okay, fine. Trying to prevent me from queening. King d7. You cannot stop me anymore. h1 queens. c8 queens with check again. A draw. Miraculous, isn't it? No matter what black does, we always just about get there. And why? That is because we understand the nature of the king. We understand that diagonal moves with the king tend to be far more efficient in what we're trying to do than moves in a straight line. That is because when we move diagonally, we tend usually to move the king closer towards the center of the board, coming from the corners. And from the center of the board, the king has got much more options. Now, coming back to our little diagram here, of course, if you choose to go 4 moves diagonally to d4, as opposed to 4 moves in a straight line with h4, from d4, the king is in the center of the board and it's affecting many more parts of the boards than it is affecting from h4. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, if all the action is taking place on this side of the board, and your king does needs to be on h4, because like all of the pawns are somewhere here, and it needs to block things up or attack something, yeah, that's understandable. That's a no-brainer. But all I'm saying is, in other positions where it's not completely obvious which side of the board is going to be the main action scene, you want your king open to as many possibilities as you can. And in that sense, moving it diagonally is something that you should definitely consider. I remember making a short about this position at Hacking Chess in 60 or Less, short number 52, and I am still to this day getting comments from people, how is this a draw? Like, black is easily winning, you missed the line, etc, etc. And I kept replying to people with many possible lines, trying to refute them, but just lines keep coming. And sometimes people make an accuracy, sometimes people don't see far enough. But look, if you don't believe me that this is a draw, set up this position on the board, switch on the engine, it will show all zeros. Just check it for yourselves if you don't believe me, guys. And in general, if you want to understand more about king movement intricacies and king and pawn endgames, I strongly recommend you, my beautiful people, to go and watch my video that I did on king and pawn endgames explained. And yeah, if you just so happened to find this video useful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, usually. Find me on chess.com, join our Discord, all that good stuff. And I'm going to talk to you very soon, my favorite unintentional gambiters. Love you all. See ya in the next one.